welcome to another exciting episode of Two Who's Review. I'm Alex,
I'm Fitz.
and today we're looking at Father's Day.
Yay.
uh, it's the first episode of the show, of the revival anyway, which I feel like they wrote explicitly to be emotional.
Oh, yeah. To be fair, Dalek got pretty emotional in the end, but yeah, this is one of those. I wouldn't say it's cliched or anything, but you can definitely tell. Oh, this is the really sad moment, audience. So
Yeah, no, this is the one with like the entire purpose of the episode is to
yeah,
lead up to the sad ending, and yeah, it works.
yeah.
It's really
This is
good.
a pretty damn good episode, honestly. Because it had been a while since I'd watched it. But I'm glad. Certainly glad that I did. It was I don't know, and maybe my mind will even change after we discuss it, but there might be maybe a couple of flaws here and there, but this is still a pretty good episode, as far as I'm.
Oh yeah, it's by no means perfect, but you know, for what I'm gonna say is the first story of its kind in Doctor Who. I'm not sure if there's ever been any classic stories that have been written explicitly like
Um,
this, particularly
hmm.
because of the focus on the human characters in the family with this season. It feels like a story that really feels like it belongs
There,
in this era of the show.
maybe an episode like a story like Curse of Fenric that's got a kind of an emotional core and sort of similar themes actually. Um, in the end, it gets quite full on, but I think yeah, I can't think of many examples in the classic series that are this explicit about, what it wants to do. Um, you could say
Yeah,
kind of wears its heart on its sleeve, which does, I think, actually work to its benefit in many ways. It really, the really important drama, um, of it, I think uh, all those sort of dramatic beats are hitting quite well, which is good because it's the core of the story. Flaws aside, so
yeah.
hmm.
Let's jump into our review of the
Hmm.
rankings on the timescales.com. Out of 231 votes, this has an 8.1 average rating.
Yeah,
Yeah, that seems
yeah,
pretty solid to me. It's
yep.
it is
It's an
that's
it's
what it is.
yep.
It's an
It's an
8.1.
8.1.
They've nailed it. Although I will say, it's interesting that it shows you how many
Hmm.
people voted for which rating. There are 24 10 out of 10 ratings, which I don't fault. I can
Yeah,
easily see why some
yeah,
people might consider
I
this a 10
wouldn't
out of 10 episode.
I might disagree there, but yeah, as you say, definitely can understand why
Oh,
people
me
would
too.
say it. Because
But there are also the lowest rating it has. Three people gave it a 4 out of 10.
ouch.
Yeah, I can also kind of see where they're coming from as well. Like, if you're the kind of person that wants, you know, big alien action and sci-fi,
Mm, mm.
explodey goodness, there's
Well,
absolutely none of that here.
I might disagree a little bit there. I think, I mean, the scores are the scores for them, for these people, I guess. But I just even if it's not sort of hitting those similar, you know, big epic sci-fi story beats that you may be used to seeing, even within Doctor Who, that it does things kind of so differently. I think it works to its benefit. Again, it may not be perfect, but I really kind of like what it does. So I don't think um, yeah, I feel the four's not fair in my view. Yeah.
Me too. Yeah, no, I agree. I just quickly scrolled down to see if I could
Yeah.
find a 4 out of 10 review and see what they thought, but it would require like going to a different tab, and I can't be asked. Um, so this episode has an 8.3 for plot.
Yeah.
I feel like this episode it sets up its plot really early, and then for the rest of the episode it's pretty much just a
I don't.
character piece.
Yeah.
So like it's not the
I
most
don't.
intricate plot of
Yeah.
all
No, it
time, but it
doesn't.
doesn't
I
need
don't
to be
mind
for
that.
this kind of
I'm
story.
fine. Even I think I've probably mentioned before. I'm comfortable, generally speaking, with stories that are have a looser plot or not a stronger focus on plot and more sort of character driven stuff. There are plenty of movies I've seen that do that. But I think you're right to point out that yes, the story it's not super intricate and it's kind of almost like half a bottle episode because they're stuck in a church, but it doesn't need to be because the characters are so important and the themes are really important too. So even though at the end, and
Yeah.
we'll get into this, I felt the story. I didn't find it a problem with it, but it wasn't like as strong as maybe I wanted it to be. But it for me, it didn't need to be super strong in order to hit those dramatic marks that it was trying to go for, which is yeah.
No, definitely. I feel like if it would be very easy to complicate this
Mm,
kind of episode with a bunch of
yeah,
different B plots and C plots, and adding thread after threat, and I think that would
yeah.
detract
And
from
I
what it's trying to do.
like the Reapers, for example, you're given some explanation as to what they are, and you get the idea that they've got to hide in the church because it's um old, but you're not given too much explanation as to who they are or what they're about. Certainly not as much as you get in many other Doctor Who episodes, which I mean, that a lot of Doctor Who episodes they kind of have to explain all the weird, wacky sci-fi nonsense that's going on. So the fact that they don't do that there, it doesn't always work in this episode, and we'll get to why I think that. But with the Reapers themselves, I think it actually works to its benefit. We don't need to know much more than that. All we need to know is scary aliens coming to clean the septic wound of time, in the get into the old building because they can't get in. That's enough. It works, which is kind of neat. Hmm.
Yeah. As a 9 for acting, yep, I can't disagree. It's absolutely the out of the revived series
Yeah,
episodes. Certainly, it's
hmm,
probably the best
yeah. I
acted
can't.
episode so far.
Yeah, certainly in terms of having consistent performances throughout the cast, yes, I'd say it's probably the best. Um,
I'd probably go even a step further and say that this is probably Billy Tyler's best episode. Billy Piper. It's Billy Piper's best episode of her entire run as Rose.
mm.
I think that
Oh
her
no,
acting in
it's
this
yeah,
is
that
pretty
that's
phenomenal.
definitely um really good. There's a lot of because I think like a lot of the episode, she's obviously quite emotional because she's meeting her dad. But within that, there's still a lot of nuance there. There's a lot of humor, which is really good. Kind of helps to sort of soften the blow of some of the more, pretty intense themes here. But it also just kind of fits in with the character. Like when Peter says, "Oh, of course you're my daughter. You've got, Jackie's attitude," but there's a lot of humor in there as well. So I think, she's drawing out a lot of the nuances in this performance. So I don't know if I'd say,
Mm.
it's like her best moment because I just, I haven't seen enough of the revival series in a while, but I defer more to your knowledge on the topic. So
It has a 7.3 for effects. Eh,
um,
look, the Reapers aren't that impressive, but their design's cool, so like I tend to overlook it.
well, here's the thing. They're not super realistic. This kind of goes back, I think, to the issue that we said about, yeah, they're trying a new technology and it's not always working. But I don't mind it. I think the way the special effects are used, the way they're used in conjunction with the direction, it's a very like the way it's like first off the way this episode is directed, I think actually is quite good. There's a lot of really great shots, like the
Oh yeah,
creepy shots of the signs of life, I guess you could call them, like the bottle of soda bursting open or the child's sandal just being left behind. It's using a lot of these sort of minimalist, suggesting more than it's showing, which is a classic, Doctor Who and sort of low budget BBC thing to do. And that adds to its benefit. It makes the Reapers more imposing, and it makes sure that we're not seeing too much of what is not a great looking visual effect. It's kind of doing what they were doing with the Jaggerfest in the last episode, except it has much more significance and bearing on the plot and the theme as a whole. But the Reapers themselves, yeah, they look kind of fake, but I'm not even like by like Doctor Who not great special effects standards, it actually doesn't bother me because I think it makes them look more otherworldly, which I think is to its benefit actually because they're so the design is really quite cool. I mean, granted, maybe I'm a bit biased there because when I was for my 13th birthday, I got a bunch of Doctor Who action figures, and the Reaper was one of them, and it was this really cool thing with a bendable wire tail and I think it had like a light on the little mouth of it. Anyway, but I really like the design. It's got almost like a German expressionist sort of a thing, which is really cool. And again, even though they don't look super realistic for me, they don't really have to because it's almost like the phoniness of the look of it kind of helps to sell the otherworldly quality of them. So I understand why people would criticize the special effects in that way, but for me personally, it doesn't bother me terribly.
I mean, I wouldn't go so far as to say that the CGI has aged sort of poorly, and that
No, no,
was
no,
on
no, no. Yeah,
purpose
no, that's
to
no, it's a
achieve
good
this
point.
otherworldly thing. But
Yeah, like it's
I
not.
see
It's
where
one of
you're
those
coming
things
from.
where it's that middle ground between trying to do something and kind of failing, but it's sort of working within the plot. And there are other movies and certainly episodes of Doctor Who I think where that happens. And I can't like totally overlook the flaw of it, but I can accept it. I can and still enjoy it as part of the world building. So yeah,
Mm.
yeah.
It has an 8 for
I
replay
what
value. It's something that you could probably I depending on your emotional
mhm.
state, it would vary. I think
Mm.
because for some
Yeah,
people
no,
this might be a
that's
bit
that's
heavy.
fair. I because I watched it twice just to prepare for this podcast, and some of the narrative flaws, I guess, near the end did kind of shine through more, but the emotional core of it and the emotional tenderness of it sort of shone through even brighter as well. So, for me, it definitely had a pretty good replay value. And because it's so emotionally heavy, as you say, if you're not in the right mood, yes, it can be um, sort of maybe unpleasant, I guess. But because it is as serious as it is, and because the emotional core is so present, I find it's pretty good for replay value for that reason alone. Hmm.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree with that. So it's the sixth highest rated Ninth Doctor TV story. If you don't include the Day of the Doctor, which this website does for some reason,
Right.
I don't know why it does that. I guess because
Yeah,
it's a multi-Doctor story and all the Doctors show up
that's
in that, so
weird.
I guess they chucked him in there. um, this episode is actually the highest rated single episode story from the Ninth Doctor that doesn't
I'd believe
include a
that.
Dalek.
Yeah, yeah, it's funny.
Yep, it's just a nice little bit of trivia there. Uh, 30 people out of 105 say you need to have watched a
Yeah,
previous story to get this one.
yeah,
Definitely, you need to have at least a
yeah,
basic understanding of Rose
yeah.
and her home life. You need to have met Jackie and all that stuff, and that you really need
Hmm.
the full picture before you jump into this one. I wouldn't say I can't speak to whether or not the ending would hit
Hmm.
as hard if you came into this blind or not. Uh, but I would say that on more than one occasion, you kind of need to
Yeah,
have seen
yeah,
other episodes in this series.
sure.
Okay, so I would read out the synopsis here, but it's embarrassingly short. Um,
Hmm.
here's the IMDb synopsis. All of her life, Rose's mother told her. Yeah, I'll start that again. I stumbled over that. All of her life, Rose's mother told how great a man her father Pete was. He was killed by a hit
What?
and run.
What the?
That's the full synopsis from IMDb. That's it. It doesn't go into
Yeah,
anything
that's
about how
that's the
Rose
whole
saves him,
setup
which is
of
literally in
the
the
fucking
first five
episode. What?
minutes.
That's
I don't understand IMDb. Like
but
it gives you the
it's so
bare
weird though,
minimum.
because like I mean, you know all these synopses we've been getting for the classic series. Have they been from IMDb?
Yeah,
Oh, okay. I
I
was gonna.
don't think so. I think they've been from other sources. They've been from the
Oh,
classic
okay.
series synopsis have actually been
I
from
was
the
gonna say
BBC
because they've been
website.
a bit longer than the revival stories, which is interesting. Um. Hmm.
Oh, I see. I see what's happening.
Hmm.
So I've just gone to the IMDb page. Uh, So what the synopsis is actually taken from the
Okay.
storyline section of the IMDb article,
Mm.
which goes into significantly
Mm.
more depth about basically the full episode. The actual
Mm.
synopsis written on top of the page is Rose asked the doctor to take her to 1987 on the day her father was
I
killed,
mean,
which
no.
is still the full thing. That still doesn't give you everything, but it's significantly more than
Hmm.
just
Yeah.
describing
Yeah. Well, I mean,
the setup that we get in
the
the cold open, basically.
like her saving her father, that's the major inciting incident for the whole thing. Um, and it's certainly what distinguishes it
Yeah.
from other episodes. Hmm.
Oh yeah,
Mm-hmm.
definitely. I suppose we'll jump in proper. So a lot of this episode
Yeah.
really hinges on Pete. You really need to the first thing this episode needs to do
Hmm.
is endear you to Pete Tyler, and I think it does that really well in a really bizarre way, where it shows that it doesn't waste any time in
Yeah.
tearing down
Yeah.
Rose's image of her father. Because we get that cold open of where
Yeah.
Jackie says, he was the most wonderful man on the planet or that ever lived, blah, blah. And then immediately
Yeah.
after the opening titles, he
Um.
forgets her name in their vows. There's nothing like the 1-2 punch of
Yeah. It's a
pretty
pretty.
extreme
It's quite
juxtaposition like
a
that.
gutsy, bold move. And it's really good that they took that risk. The fact that they, as you say, they're going for this kind of sentimental, almost like a gentle open. Like it's melancholy because you realize or get the impression that this guy's dead, but there's a real endearing quality. And then to just have this sledgehammer moment that just kind of smashes that to pieces, and it's kind of. I mean, I know I talked about the direction of it as well, but just even the subtle elements of how the acting and like the actors are directed in that scene. There's just this close up of the reverse shot of Rose's face, and you can just kind of see the I don't know. I feel like you can see the desperate attempt of her to like rationalize this moment. Um, it's not like, and it's not super obvious that
Mm,
that's what she's thinking, but it's there just enough to kind of really sow those seeds of doubt in the audience's mind, which is quite good. And I must say, I um, I really
yeah.
like what they did with that element of the story because I think, to an extent, you could have had this story without the um, you know, Pete, not being as great as he was talked up to be. You theoretically could have had it be that, oh, he's just this really nice person that actually really does care about his family and still get the plot to where it needs to go. But the fact that they took that risk and added that thematic richness um, is for me, a real selling point with this episode and really elevates it. The fact that, it's about not lionizing the dead and how people rewrite history, basically, which I think is an important part.
Yeah, well, it also
Yeah,
just does a great job of
yeah,
humanizing Pete. I think if he had
yeah,
been this bastion of morality that Jackie had talked him up to be, I don't think it would have been nearly as interesting a story because like it is another character growth episode where Pete goes from being this really not that amazing person
yeah,
to making the
yeah,
sacrifice play at the end and being completely content with it. And that arc is
yeah,
really,
absolutely.
really strongly executed in this. I should say
Hmm.
that this episode was written by Paul Cornell, whose only other writing credit for the series is Human Nature and the Family of Blood, which I believe I went on record as saying was one
Right.
of my favorite
That,
episodes of the
yeah,
show. So
he
this
no,
guy,
he
this guy
can,
can
yeah,
write emotion so well. He writes Billy Piper's best performance in this episode, and then he writes David Tennant's best
yeah.
performance
I
in the
mean,
Family of Blood.
yeah, no, that makes sense. And I think, again, you say that story arc getting Pete to where he needs to go, and the fact that he when we first actually see him, he is presented by all accounts, including Jackie's, honest account, as a moral and professional failure. The fact that he, rises above that and rises to the
Yeah.
occasion, it's a classic sort of storytelling technique, but it just works so wonderfully here. Um,
Well, it goes even further than that actually, because
hmm,
he actually goes through a couple of different changes over the episode. Because he has his mid episode low point where
hmm,
when he realizes that he's meant to be dead, And the thing he takes away from that is, okay, so that's why I amounted to nothing. Like,
Mm.
he has a really depressive episode in the middle there where, he has this
Mm.
really like deep melancholy of, okay, so I was nothing, and that's why I died in such a nothing way. It's
Yeah.
pretty actually harrowing to be confronted with your
Mm.
own, not mortality, but your own
Yeah,
existence
the
like that.
bleakness and the supposed meaninglessness of existence, and it all kind of it sort of fits together with the sort of care for the average person that the Doctor has. When he talks to the married couple, saying, um, I wish I had a life like that, and then when he says to Rose, like an average person, that's the
Mm.
most important thing in creation. I think it all kind of comes together in this pretty thematically rich episode. And as I say, it theoretically didn't need to go that far. It could have hit basically the same story beats and had the same themes about, messing with the timeline. But the fact that they did take it to that level certainly is one of the bigger reasons that, this episode is elevated for me. Um, mm. Yeah,
Yeah, well, it's about the
absolutely.
complexity of the human condition, and we shouldn't
Yeah,
downplay Sean Dingwall's performance as Pete. He's
yeah.
really good at playing that everyman at the start, and then when he realizes that Rose is his
Mm.
daughter, the way he just sort of shifts, and it's all really realistic, and I think that's a huge part of this episode. It's everything is pretty, apart from one or two areas, it's all pretty naturalistic. It's all everyone reacts basically this is the way you would think they
Mm.
react in this kind of situation, and that, like I said, the human element has been a significant focus of the show in this run so far. These last 8 episodes of Doctor Who have been pretty, they've
Yeah.
lent on the human side of things far more than the show's done before.
Mm.
And this episode, I think, is the one that goes the most into that, because, as you say, they do take time out of the episode for the Doctor to just have a chat with the couple who was supposed to get married, and he learns a bit about them. And I think the most they show up later in the episode is that the groom gives a battery to the Doctor. Like, they don't become important figures later on. They don't make a big gesture or sacrifice play or anything like that. But, like, that's, I'm glad they don't, because again, that's just another another humanizing element of this story. The fact that it can take time to talk to characters who really don't have much to do with the plot, and we just
Yeah.
learn a bit about them, and it's wonderful.
Having like the theme of what does it mean to be human, has cropped up significantly in this season, and even though there are certainly I think stories in the classic series that do address it, I don't think it's been certainly hasn't been addressed this consistently, um, and it's very interesting that they, as you say, this is the episode that really sort of leans into that. And the Doctor says, I've done it again. I've picked up another stupid ape. Um, but having that contrast to, well, what is the Doctor's sort of definition of humanity? Um, like he hates the ignorance, and the small mindedness and this even the selfishness of humans. Because he asked Rose, I told you, this could travel in space, and then I told you it could travel in time. And he basically asked, was all this just to, to do this to save your dad? Um, and then he says something like, you humans, it's never about exploring the stars, is it? Um, so having that contrast between what he hates about humanity, but then having it come full circle and him realizing, oh, what I actually really love about humanity and average people, in particular, um,
Mm.
it, mm,
Well, I think that's important for the Doctor, especially in the context of the last couple episodes. We had, Henry Van Staten,
yeah,
pulling the stars down and shoving them under concrete. And then immediately with Adam, where he wants to
yeah,
use his knowledge of the future for personal profit. And now we get this with Rose saving her dad. I think if he didn't have those previous
oh
stories,
yeah, and
he might
I
not
think
have
I
been as
even
harsh
said
as he
when we
was.
did the long game that it one of the things I liked about that episode was it helps set up the themes of this episode quite well. Like the Doctor at the beginning of this episode says, why do you want to go back in time? Like what's brought this on all of a sudden? And she says, I don't know, I just thought I'd do it. But we kind of do know what has brought it on, and it's because we've seen the previous episode and we've seen that Rose, she understands, oh, you can actually, do interesting things with time. As the Doctor says, maybe Rose is thinking, how can I make time work for me, like Adam did? So, yeah.
At the very least, subconsciously, she's picked up on the idea that it's at the very least possible to cross paths.
And I also,
with
this is another
history.
small detail, just with the Doctor's characterization. You could actually argue in a way that at the beginning he he obviously cares for Rose, and he wants to do something that'll make her happy. So he takes her back to this day. But he, in a way, is kind of irresponsible at the beginning because, she literally says, oh, if it's against the laws of time, then don't worry. But no, he says, nope, your wish is my command. Just be careful what you wish for. So you'd think, given how angry he, for good reason, gets in the end of the episode, you'd think he'd be more responsible than that. But
well, I think especially the traveling back.
Yeah, absolutely.
Twice.
Yeah.
Where they're literally staring at their past selves around the corner. He's playing incredibly hard and fast with his own
which again, because that phrase, the laws of time, I'm, the fact that Rose says that specifically, I'm, convinced that that's not a coincidence because that phrase gets said quite frequently in the classic series. The entire thing of the multi-Doctor stories, the reason why they can be kind of one of the tensions of them is that that's not supposed to happen. Even Time Lords aren't really meant to transgress the laws of time and go back on their own timelines. So the fact that the Doctor is being reckless here, it's quite shocking, and it's really helpful, I think, for characterization because it just helps set up that conflict for the Doctor thinking, because when he gets angry at Rose, for being too human and just wanting the universe to do something for her. In a way, maybe maybe he's angry at himself as well. Maybe he's thinking, oh, I shouldn't have, fucked around with the timeline, but here we are, and I'm just vent my frustrations, I guess.
Oh yeah, well, certainly to some degree he's got to be a little angry at himself.
Having that, those layers in the characterization, throughout, I'd say basically all the characters, but especially with the Doctor and Pete. Again, these are the things that kind of elevate the episode for me, and they really, it makes the episode rich, is the way I describe it.
Yeah. This is a weird thing to bring up now, but it's weird seeing the Doctor, or this Doctor, without the jacket. He takes the jacket off to pick up the key, and then we just see the Doctor in a long sleeve green shirt. And I know he's been wearing that for pretty much his entire run, but I still can't.
It's bizarre.
He seems incomplete.
I thought he had a red shirt or something on, but all right. Yeah,
I think he's had a red shirt in other episodes, but in this one it's absolutely green because I made note of it. It's also a very, very chilling image
and to have
to
it
see
gone,
the Doctor open the TARDIS
the interior of it.
have it be empty inside. It's such a unique way to take the TARDIS out of commission, and it makes a lot of sense given what we know about the Reapers. I suppose this is a good chance to talk about them now. So as you said earlier, we don't really know a significant amount about them, and I'm positive that's by design because the Doctor also seems to be piecing it together as he goes as well. The idea that when time gets fairly weak and then there's an infraction or a paradox, that allows an opening for these essentially what are essentially bacteria, as the Doctor describes them, to come in and take advantage. I think that's the key. It's less about sterilizing time and getting it back to where it needs to be. It's about, okay, I always imagine it as they're these kind of extra dimensional creatures who live maybe not in the void but in a similar space, and they've seen their opening and then bam, literally like a virus, in they come and now they're going to feed. So they're less like antibodies and more like, just
doesn't the Doctor say specifically that they're here to sterilize the wound? Or I might be misremembering that.
Yeah, but I mean,
Hmm.
I'm not sure how clean a metaphor that is because had they finished the job, there would
Hmm.
be nothing left,
Hmm.
and that's not what sterilization does. Um, if they were there to purely sterilize the wound, they'd all be
Hmm.
targeting Pete, and they weren't. There's a couple of inconsistencies in the way the doctor
Oh, does
describes them
he?
because he
Okay,
also says
well,
they're bacteria. Um, yeah, I
right.
yeah. So they cross their metaphors a couple times, which is
Hmm.
I think the weakest part of the writing, in that I don't think it's like it's a strength that the Reapers aren't that well defined, but that can lead to moments like this where we're
Hmm.
kind of confused on what specifically they are. And I think because they don't show up in any other episodes where there is
Hmm.
a time paradox, we have to consider that. I mean, that's why they set it up at the
Yeah.
beginning with two sets of the Doctor and Rose. And the Doctor makes it clear it's
Yeah.
a week. Time's kind of weak because there's
Mm.
two of them there, and that's why the Reapers get to come in. It's not just a
Mm.
general
Yeah,
paradox
but
sort
fair
of thing.
enough. Yeah, that there's, as you say, inconsistencies with how these creatures are described. I suppose that's a good lead into, I think, what I found to be some of the flaws with the storytelling, particularly near the end. As I say, I do like the fact that the Reapers aren't explained terribly in how they work, but as you pointed out, it probably would have been helpful to get even like a little bit more context on how they all work, because the thing, like the idea of Pete sacrificing himself to, save everybody and fix the paradox. I don't know, like if you could say it's a foregone conclusion, but it makes perfect sense that it would go that way. And emotionally, it is very
Yeah,
satisfying. But I felt like I wanted more explanation as to how that worked, because having the Doctor just vanish, um, getting taken by these creatures, that's a great idea. That's shocking and scary, and that's not something we're used to seeing. And
yeah,
it'll make the audience feel really vulnerable. But having it just basically fix itself because one character's sacrificed himself, again, emotionally it works, and I love the fact that they took that risk. But I wanted there to be a little bit more explanation. I wanted there to be maybe a more careful attention paid to world building and the logic that the writers are using here. Because to have it be, oh, sacrifice, everything's better because timey wimey magic, I guess it doesn't. Yeah,
yeah. Well, especially because the Reaper appeared to like
yeah,
literally consume the Doctor in that moment. Like they I think the way they hunt, it's literally
yeah.
just they're hunting and they're eating, people, and then you know we don't even see the Reapers. Do we see the Reapers vanish when Pete does his sacrifice play? Do we see them like properly disappear at all, or is it just that he does it, then we cut back to
I
Rose
don't
and the
know,
Doctor
but I
walks
feel like
past?
if there was like a shot of them vanishing, we probably would have remembered it. Yeah.
Sure, and that's another thing that makes me think that these creatures are kind of extra dimensional in a way. The
Oh,
fact that
yeah.
they clearly don't operate
No,
by a
absolutely.
consistent
And
set
they
of
again, they
rules
don't
that
make
we
it
can
clear,
think
but
of.
even though they don't say that they're from a an extra dimension, yeah, I think it's definitely clear that that's the impression the writers are trying to give you. Because again, as you say, they do not operate under any sort of laws of physics. They fly and float through the air.
Yeah,
Um, and again, even just the design of them, they look so alien. I imagine, yeah, they've come from some other sort of void dimension, which is interesting. Um, but yeah, I
it'd be interesting to see them return at some point. If not just to see the same
mm,
designs but with better technology, making them look slightly more realistic. I'd love to see, a more detailed Reaper
yeah,
model at some point.
mm,
I'm not sure what kind of story you could tell with them that would be different, but
yeah. I think as even
I
as a
don't know. It could be
concept, I
interesting.
quite like them being these kind of these really, pardon the pun, but grim sort of replacement for the Time Lords. They're chilling in a very symbolic way in that sense. Like they're like because again, you've got the Time Lords with all the laws of time and everything like that, but the fact that these horrifying, emotionless things have just sort of replaced the Time Lords, it's really chilling. So I love the way they're used in that sense, but it's a shame they haven't shown up again, because it would be interesting to see, just to, again, to see them return, but also to understand, get a better understanding of how they fit into, um, the worlds that the writers of Doctor Who are building. So, yeah.
Well, it's interesting that you say Grim, because the initial design of the Reapers was literally the Grim
Yeah,
Reaper.
yeah.
They were meant to look like big men in cows carrying scythes or have big tails. Um, the reason that they were changed from this design is because they looked too similar to the adherents of the
Uh,
repeated meme.
I mean, yeah.
I'm glad they switched it to the design that they use, because I don't think that if it was just a bunch of Grim Reapers walking around, it would have been. I
Yeah,
don't know
I
if it would have had
think
the same effect or not.
it's one of those things where, because that sort of thing of having, like, a dark sort of hooded Reaper figure, I'm sure that's been done quite a lot even in Classic Who, but like, in a way, it would humanize them too much. You'd expect them to maybe speak, or at the very least do like a Ghost of Christmas Future,
Yeah,
stand and point sort of a thing. But even then, that's too human. The fact that they went with this, again, very strange and alien design, I think that works to their benefit. And this is kind of going back to what I've said about the middle ground between uh, ambitious intention and technical um, lack of competence. The fact that they went with these wacky designs, which they obviously must have known they would have to have done with CG, the fact that they took that risk, that means that they couldn't show them, too much, because again, the CG doesn't look amazing, but that in itself works to its benefit, because it just, again, helps with this dehumanizing process and makes them more formidable. So it is really good that they did go with this design, and it's a lot more original too.
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, sure.
I suppose we should talk about Rose now. Um, so I know what you're
Oh
ready
boy,
for.
it's cuffs.
I've made
It's
it very
cuffs. I'm
clear.
frustrated with Rose segment of the week.
Well, here's the thing. I've made it
Yeah.
pretty clear that I dislike Rose.
Hmm.
I've had small things here and there in the past few episodes, or pretty
Hmm.
much every episode. But I bring up something, even if it is just saying Rose gets captured or trapped this number of times. And by the way,
Hmm.
Rose gets captured or trapped number 6.
Hmm.
They
Hmm.
all get trapped in the church, and I'll explain that more in a bit. And in this episode, she is arguably the direct cause
Hmm.
of the problem, and is directly or indirectly, depending on how you look at it, responsible for many people dying. It doesn't stay permanent, but the point still
Hmm.
stands. So I know what you're expecting. You're waiting
Hmm.
for me to give this big rant about how could she do that, how irresponsible, why is she a companion, and that's really not coming. I can't really fault Rose for, at the very least.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I mean, who wouldn't in that situation? It's very hard to look at that and say, "Oh, I can say with 100% certainty that if I was
Yeah.
in her
And I
shoes, I would not have done that." Because you just don't know. It's something that I absolutely hate about when people watch fiction and go, "Why are you making that decision? That's so stupid. I wouldn't have done that." And it's like, well, yeah, because
Hmm.
you know it's a work of fiction and you're watching from an outside perspective. If you're in that position, there's a million things you'll be thinking about.
Hmm.
You're not always going to be thinking rationally. And if every character in every story ever thought rationally 100% of the time,
Yeah,
fiction would
I
be
quite agree.
boring as
I
hell.
think, because I watched it the second time yesterday, and I was like, it's at that moment when Rose first meets Jackie and meets, baby Rose, and the conversation's quite awkward and stilted. Like, Rose, she's almost stumbling over her words, and there was a small part of me that thought,
Yeah.
boy, I'd probably be smarter than that in that situation. But then I realized, would I really? Because that's a really emotional thing to to deal with. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, like,
It's
yeah,
culture
well,
shock times
like
a
the doctor says,
billion.
the past is a different country. But like, I I even thought like, well, Nick, what the fuck would you do if you somehow went back in time to, I don't know, like Christmas Eve 2004 or something? How the hell would you react there? You wouldn't. You just crumple. Like, seeing a younger version
Yeah.
of yourself and all the, I guess, potential. That's really shocking. I'm glad you've sort
Hmm.
of raised, Rose's characterization as one of the key points, because it is one of the key points of the episode. But yeah,
Yeah,
I
it's
think,
it's a it's a
and the thing
huge
is, like,
factor,
you
isn't
say
it?
that, oh, I'm not sure if you would say you're ready to be frustrated with Rose. But the fact that you weren't, there is, I think, a definite reason for that, and the reason is because, and I guess I kind of hate to say it, but as opposed to most of the bleh, as opposed to most of the other episodes in this season, there's a significant amount of character growth for her. She goes from,
Yeah,
again, being, like, yeah, in the grand scheme of things, irresponsible, but still completely understandable in how she reacts to this situation. But she really, really learns, I suppose, her lesson. Like, she really learns how, serious, messing with the timeline is. And also learns, to have
yeah,
a more human, albeit flawed view of her father. So the fact that she's going through all of these sort of nuanced
definitely, yeah.
changes, I think that's probably why you're not frustrated, because yes, it's got all these sort of trappings of the reasons why you find Rose to be very frustrating, but none of it is a problem. It's
Well,
either benign or it's a key part of her characterization. So, mm,
look, I've been saying it the whole time.
mm,
I'm not going into these episodes looking for reasons to hate Rose. Um, you know, I wouldn't necessarily have called the Doctor jealous for being not the only
yeah, yeah,
father figure in my life anymore. That seems a bit of a stretch, and even that is like an attempt
mm,
to justify holding on to what she now has gained. So I mean, like I said, all of her actions in this episode, uh, at least in isolation, are pretty well justified within themselves. I like I said, they're they're
mm,
clearly not the smartest things to do, but they're not things that I don't think
yeah,
anyone can say with absolute certainty I wouldn't do. And I tend to give her a pass
mm,
in isolation. It's just such a goddamn shame that in literally the previous episode, a companion gets kicked out of the TARDIS in spectacular fashion for making the same mistake Rose
well,
makes, but
he's,
lesser.
he,
Because that's what it is. Adam's mistake, like, the Doctor was able to fix that before it did any harm, and then
mm,
he was abandoned in his own
mm,
timeline with a fucking door in his head. Rose here
mm.
is
And the
directly
Doctor
responsible
doesn't
for a lot of
even,
people dying,
mm,
and by the end of the episode,
yeah,
status quo is restored and everything's hunky
and
dory.
well, here's the thing,
Uh,
mm,
like I said, in isolation, it all works fine.
with
But
the
we've been
others,
talking
yeah,
about this episode in context of the rest of the season. We've said that the Doctor's actions in this episode are almost directly
yeah,
related to the events of the
um,
previous
mm,
episodes.
mm-hmm,
So the fact that this happened right after Adam gets kicked out, it's a little harder for me to
yeah,
go, okay, maybe there should have been a little. I'm not sure what the Doctor should have done, and I don't think kicking her out of the TARDIS is the right move because
mm,
it's obviously a lot more emotionally trying. She learns a lesson. Adam at the end of last week's episode was clearly still
yeah,
in that deflecting mood and going, I haven't done anything wrong. There are elements here and there, but again, like it ties into a couple of
mm,
things that
mm-hmm,
frustrate me with
mm-hmm,
Rose in this story because I still have a
yeah,
couple.
yeah,
Like her main actions, fine. I don't have a problem
mm,
with her saving her dad. Like I said, I probably would have done the same thing.
mm-hmm,
But there are three sticking points that I have, which when you combine them all together, by the end of the episode, make me
mm-hmm,
go, maybe there should have been a little punishment here. Number one, she had time not to grab the
um,
baby. There was so much time for her to back away in the seat. It's not like if she had
mm,
moved, Pete would have just kept going and let go of the child. He would have just held on to her. And when the doctor has explicitly told her twice not to touch the baby,
was it twice at that
she
point?
just grabs it when Pete gives it to her. Not a
Oh,
good move.
okay, yeah.
It was twice, but it was in the same conversation.
It'll be a
He goes, "Don't
paradox
touch the
and-
baby," and
yeah.
then he explains the paradox,
Yeah.
and then goes, "Don't touch the
Yeah.
baby," and then she touches the baby. Not a good move, especially when you've already messed with time considerably. After that point, I would take any advice about
Mhm.
not messing with time
Mhm.
pretty strongly. Like, we talk about that,
Yeah.
human mistakes kind of thing, but I don't care. You've been told. I'd be on my guard at that point, especially if there's Reapers outside. Back away. Like I said, Pete's not going to drop her just because you're not there anymore. Move aside. Don't touch the baby. Pretty simple.
Yeah, no worries. No, go,
And
go
I'll
right
let
ahead.
you respond to all this in a sec, but I need to get this out. Number 2, the continuing disrespect towards Mickey. I didn't think it would happen. Mickey's a child in this story and gets one line, which is just "mummy" or whatever it is. I don't remember what he says.
Doesn't he also say, "Oh, there are monsters coming"?
Mummy, whatever it is.
Earlier on. Yeah. Anyway.
Monsters coming. That's it. Yeah. But literally 5 seconds before Mickey runs into the room, Pete asks, "Do you have a man in your life?" And her first word is, "No." Immediately. She doesn't even have to think about it. She directly says, "No, I don't have a boyfriend." Yes you do, and he's about to run into the room to confront you with how bad a person you are, Rose. It's, again, coming off the heels of last week with her flirting with Adam, and it's, the continuing disrespect, and, I don't even care if by this point Rose has moved on from Mickey.
Yeah,
Tell him!
I had a feeling that
let him off the hook!
Moment was going to crop up, and I have my own thoughts saying about it, but I'll let you continue. What was the third thing?
Well, and these issues are going to pipe up significantly more in Boomtown. That is where the height of Mickey disrespect shows up, and it's the first part of when I really start to hate Rose. Like I said, up until now, these things have only been small things. The third thing. What the hell was the third thing?
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I don't mean to laugh terribly. But that's just. Oh, he's back.
Oh no, that was it. I'm
Yeah.
positive there was a third thing. I'm not just projecting. Okay, so throughout the entire story, it's pretty explicitly clear that Rose is, like I said, she's to blame. She's not the sole reason.
But she's the
we said, the
catalyst.
Doctor was pretty reckless, and yeah, she's the catalyst, and then she continues to make things worse throughout the story. And this is unrelated, but you know how I said earlier, Rose gets trapped again. You can very easily make the argument, well, everyone gets trapped in the church. Which is true, but then Rose continues to be a completely inert force in the story until she touches the baby and makes things worse. Like I said, other companions get trapped all the time, but they still actively take steps to progress the story.
We've already had examples with Sarah Jane and
stuff
Joe.
like this. But this is yet... Yep, and this is yet another example of Rose getting trapped and her not doing anything of note for the rest of the story. It's yet another example of that happening. But my main problem I have with her after that is this. She and the Doctor finally reconcile about halfway through the episode. He says he's sorry for being harsh and running off on her. He says he was never gonna. And then I'm waiting for the natural thing to happen. I'm waiting for Rose to go, well, now that we're hashing this out, I'm sorry I was reckless. I'm sorry I didn't listen to you. I'm sorry I was mean to you, blah, blah, blah. And I'm waiting for it. And I'm still waiting. And he warns her not to touch the baby. He gets a little rude with her again. He describes the situation they're in. Again, I'm still waiting for it. She says something like, if I had known what was going to happen. Well, that's not an apology either. That's just an attempt to take some heat off yourself. That's not an apology. The only time she apologizes for any of her actions in this episode is when the Doctor has to ask her to.
What moment was that specifically?
He literally has... Oh, it's in that conversation as well. Like I think
Mm.
it's shortly after that whole if I had known what was going to happen.
Oh
He
yeah.
literally says to her, "Just tell me you're sorry, and then we'll call it even," or
Mm.
something to that effect. And then she does, and you can tell it's heartfelt. But again,
Mm.
do it immediately. What the fuck are you waiting for? He's apologized. You've clearly got a lot to apologize for. Fucking do it. And then at the end of the episode, she doesn't say anything either. She doesn't apologize again for making things worse and getting the Doctor literally killed.
Mm.
She doesn't accept any kind of
This is a slight
responsibility.
digression, but just to clear something up, you know how you said basically a whole bunch of people lose their lives. Did they all like get brought back to life in the end because the time was fixed? That they're all
Yeah, I think the implication is that because we see
Yeah.
the father of the groom back again. So I think that and especially when Jackie is
Oh yeah, of
describing the
course,
story
'cause
to
the
Rose
wedding
at the end
actually.
at the end of the episode, she doesn't say there had just been a
Yeah, of
a
course.
massacre and then also Pete died. Like she doesn't bring
Yeah.
any of that up. So I think the implication is that everyone came back. So but regardless of whether they did or not, she should feel some guilt. And again, the fact that she by the end of the episode still has nothing to say about her actions, and she still doesn't apologize of her own
Yeah.
volition. Like the Doctor gives her a look, and she gives a look back. But
Mhm.
but there should be more than that. Like I don't like this story that I'm about to reference, but I feel like it's a good comparison. You definitely won't remember this. The season 8 finale, Dark Water. It's the first finale with Clara and the 12th Doctor.
Probably not.
You're not gonna remember. So at the start of the episode, Clara's boyfriend Danny is killed, and Clara takes a bit of a turn, and well, she's the Doctor. It turns out this is all based on a hallucinogenic patch the Doctor gives her, but she believes that she has hijacked the TARDIS near a volcano and has stolen all the TARDIS keys and is threatening to destroy them all in lava unless he time travels to save Danny. And she goes through with it. She throws the keys one by one into the lava until there's one left. The Doctor continues to say he won't do anything to affect time. And then she throws the last TARDIS key into the lava. And she is immediately racked with guilt about it. She's immediately apologetic about it. She's like, "What? Oh my god, what have I done? What have I done? I'm so sorry." Instantly, the instant she does it, she loses it and she starts crying and apologizing and when it's revealed that it was all just a hallucination, she doesn't immediately go, "Oh, okay, well the keys are fine. I feel nothing." She is perfectly ready to leave the TARDIS as a result. She's ready for the Doctor to go, "How dare you betray my trust like this? Get out." And she starts leaving the TARDIS as well. And even then, in that moment, she's still very sorry for what she's done. And I didn't even like Clara that much. But that is a significantly nicer and more... Like I said, it's just taking the accountability. And going, "Oh my god, what have I done? I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry." The genuine emotion, like, she does all of this unprompted. She doesn't need the Doctor to say, "You tell me you're sorry right now and we'll call it even." And now we jump... Yeah, immediately. And now we jump back to this, and there's none of it. If you need to ask someone to be nice, then they are not a nice person.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's generally true.
Anyway, I've had my
right.
moment in the sun.
Yeah, I do.
If you want to respond to any of that,
you raised some interesting points. So I'll sort of go through your points one by one. So your point about her, clearly having time to move away from the baby. So two things. One, I'm not sure if that's true, because the way the scene is directed and even the way it's written, I feel like it really was just one of those split-second things. So there's that. The second part about that is it's not good. It is a dumb thing to do, because the Doctor, clearly said, "Do not touch the baby" twice. But again, it goes back to, well, how would you react in this scene? And I feel like I empathize with Rose's emotional vulnerability there. Like, maybe she didn't super want to hold the baby, but maybe there was something going on there. It's like, oh, would it be the worst thing in the world? Now, it was the worst thing in the world, but like, she didn't have time to really process that. So again, it's a bad thing to do. It's not good, but I can at least empathize with that a little bit. And again, the way it's written, the way it's directed, I think it works. And even if you argue, oh, it was a dumb thing to do, I still kind of like the way it's worked into the story, because I don't know if this is getting kind of meta, but just taking in what that little bit in the episode is trying to do for the story, I can relatively forgive that. So there's that. Yeah, go ahead.
One thing really quick about that though. I don't know if you've ever been handed a baby before.
Yeah, that's
but
true.
You
Yeah,
have
fair
to
enough.
prepare.
Yeah. I mean,
you have to get your arms into the correct position. And also, I timed it. She had a solid 3 seconds to back away, and she didn't. Like, if she had just been like handed it immediately, haphazardly, like that's fine. But again, you have to be really careful with how you hold a baby. You have to get your arms into the right position, cradle the head, or everything like that. And she clearly did all of those things. So, I would tend to disagree with you on that one.
Yeah, so there's that. So the second thing, the Rose's infidelity thing. Now, I have said before on this podcast, I definitely understand why that bothers you as much as it does. It, for whatever reason, doesn't bother me terribly. But again, I certainly understand why you and any other audience member would think, actually, yeah, that's kind of a sort of shitty way to frame, infidelity. That's, as you say, I think one of your key issues with it is this is meant to be a show relatively geared towards kids, so, what are we teaching them, things like that. But here's the curious thing. So I watched that scene with Mickey, and after watching it the second time, I felt a couple of things. One, it's this particular element, it seems to be emphasized the least in this episode compared to the previous episodes, whereas her infidelity was kind of, maybe not front and center, but more, kind of more visible. But the ironic thing is, that small moment, that bothered me more than any of the other moments in the previous episode. That was the moment when, even the first time I watched this episode in preparation for this podcast, where I thought, like, when she says, oh, have you got a man in your life? And she's like, oh, no, not anymore. I'm like, sorry? When was that decided, Rose? I
think maybe it's just because, as an isolated moment, it's sort of nothing. But I think you're spotting the pattern a lot more now.
Yeah, especially because Adam, because he was a massive part of the previous episode. I'm pretty sure he would get more screen time than Rose in the previous episode. So the fact that relationship is there, that context, I think, had already put me sort of more on the alert for that sort of behavior. So when she said it, I'm like, well, actually, Rose, yeah, when did you have that discussion? I don't remember you having the discussion. So is the idea here that, oh, I've been running around in time and space, and I've been meeting other men, so my relationship's over? Is that the logic they're using here, or is there an...
I think it might also be... I think another reason you might have, latched onto this moment a lot more is that in previous episodes, with the Adam stuff, a lot of that was used to highlight Adam as a character as well. And, the focus was on the juxtaposition of Adam as a companion versus Rose as a companion, and how Adam makes all the wrong decisions. But in this episode, there's no other story arc like that. So when she says something like that, oh no, this is just something that's baked into her character.
And here's the thing. That element of, sort of framing the infidelity in a I don't know, how would you phrase it, a respectful way, I guess. You could theoretically still have that moment, but then maybe in the next episode or in a future episode, Rose actually does really regret the way she's treated Mickey. But given that it's just this isolated thing where she just thinks, oh, maybe I haven't been treating him very well, but oh well, and then presumably, and you know better than I, this element is going to be emphasized even more in the subsequent episodes. Maybe that's one of the reasons why it sort of struck me as disconcerting. So yeah, I guess there's that. So that's the second part. The third part, because it just reminded me what the third part was, the fact that she doesn't really...
The
Yeah,
fact
well,
the
really,
fact that she
yeah,
doesn't ever apologize to the Doctor
yeah.
unprompted, or really
Or
let it
the
sink in
fact
that
that the
she holds
writers
any kind of
didn't
guilt
frame that behavior in
over
the
what she's
narrative
done.
as something that really, really shouldn't have been done on like a personal level. Like we know it's a bad thing to do because the Doctor said it, but like there's no massive consequences for Rose personally. Yeah,
Yeah. Well, I think also I know that someone's going to say no. She has that moment with Pete where she goes, "This was all my fault," and Pete says, "I'm your dad. It's my job for it to be
it
my
is.
fault," which is a nice moment. But I think that without Rose acknowledging the fact that that she still feels some guilt after that, it reads way too
Yeah,
much
like
like
yeah,
Pete
as he said, I'm the one
absolving
who's meant to
Rose.
screw up. I mean, I'm paraphrasing there, but that's what he basically says. So, yeah, I think
Yeah.
again, like I think even watching it a second time before this podcast, that element didn't bother me that much. I felt the emotional impact was still there, and it all kind of comes to a head when she's talking to Pete, which is really great. But now that you mention it, I do think I understand a bit why that would frustrate you, and I'll give you an example of why. So, um, I was wondering whether I would ever bring up the show on this podcast. So, um, you definitely know, Cuff, that I'm a huge fan of the DuckTales remake. We both really enjoyed it. Um,
Yeah, we
fantastic
both did
show.
enjoy it. I think it's an
I have
amazing
my own
show.
personal feelings on how season 3 didn't quite stick the landing as well as season 1 and 2, but that's a whole other discussion. Anyway, point is, we both really enjoy the show. But there's that one
Sure.
episode with the time traveling bathtub, and in the end, because it's framed as kind of just this sort of silly, yeah, timey-wimey adventure in cartoon land, and there's you know Ben Franklin, and he's shaking the camera saying, what is this box? Is it sealing my soul? And we're all having a fun time. And even when Launchpad said, yeah, I saw the future and saw the end of the world, it was horrifying, but it was really cool. It's framed as, just, fun adventure. But then in the end, it pulls the rug out from under us by framing Louis' behavior as genuinely selfish. And he faces the consequences for that. Della
Mm-hmm.
steps up. She, sort of puts her foot down with discipline, and that is used as a way to frame Louis' behavior as very selfish, because as Della herself said, you basically nearly vanished your family out of existence. How could you do that? So the reason why I bring that up is presumably, and I assume you're going to agree here, that would be the way to do a story like this, because they do have similar themes. So presumably that sort of narrative is what you were wanting in the end here. And again, even if it didn't,
Well, I think all I wanted was like rather than them just walking away at the episode, you have a scene of them in the TARDIS at the end. The Doctor's operating it kind of quietly, and I just wanted Rose at any point to just walk up and go, an unprompted "I'm sorry." And that's really all I wanted. I just wanted any kind of acknowledgement that Rose had learned from her mistake, or at the very least learned to accept the responsibility for the mistake. Because we know by the end of the episode she's not going to go tampering with time again. But like I said, she the fact that she doesn't appear to show any guilt, especially because from the previous episode we have a pattern of the type if a companion fucks up and messes with time, there's some punishments in store. The fact that there's none of that here,
one,
you go, okay, well, what the fuck is going on?
Sort of pushback I would give to that is, you could argue Rose's behavior, though quite destructive, and again, she doesn't quite really regret it in the end, but the initial reason for it is more justifiable than what Adam was doing, because Adam was just being kind of selfish and trying to, advance human civilization, maybe even, I don't know, to get famous, I guess, but whereas with Rose, the Doctor, I think, recognizes, he's a fellow person who's lost someone near and dear to them, so in that sense, it's kind of more justifiable. Now, having said that, the fact that
no, definitely
they didn't, show it to be, like a really regretful moment in the end, you could argue that's a bit inconsistent and jarring. And you could have even had, that emotional element of it being, oh, this is more on principle justifiable than what Adam was doing. But if they were going to do that, as you say, you would still probably need that moment when Rose has her sort of big moment of regret, and the fact that they didn't do that, yeah, sort of hampers the storytelling, I guess. So yeah, those are my responses.
No, yeah, there's definitely a difference in the situation. Like, you know, it's left ambiguous whether or not this was a big grand plan of Rose. Um, I don't think it was something that she planned on
Yep.
doing. I think it was just kind of a spur of the moment thing. But I think there's the other element of this. The Doctor works out very quickly that he can save everyone by letting Pete die, and yet he works so hard to stop that from happening. He keeps that information from Rose and Pete. He finds this other solution with the TARDIS key. Even before that moment, it's not something he ever brings up. You know, he's doing his best throughout that entire thing to protect Rose. To the point where the key's doing something and the TARDIS is reappearing. I don't know, that bit wasn't very well explained or defined. But something's happening. Presumably it's the TARDIS attempting to come back from its isolation. And even after all that, even after how nice he's treated her, despite his harshness at the beginning, he still doesn't get anything like that from Rose in return. It's another example of Rose treating her relationships with people as pretty one-sided. And it's not behavior that it's behavior that I've seen in real life before. And it makes me kind of sick. So to see it here with very little to say about it, very little shining a light on it, and again, especially for you know, young impressionable children watching this, I'm not saying that the kids will instinctively pick up on Rose's behavior and go, "Ooh, I want to be like that." But there is that danger.
Again, because even like when I watched this as a kid, as you say, these things, they kind of went over my head. Although I was a bit, you know, younger, I was like 11, so those sort of more complex elements of relationships, I think, just, you know, they didn't quite register with me. I was more, oh, crazy fun timey-wimey times in time and space and aliens, I guess. But again, you're not wrong to point that out. And because the thing is, I could theoretically say, well, you may be a bit biased here because, you know, this sort of taps into some of your lived experience, whereas it may not tap into mine. But that doesn't make your interpretation of it any less justifiable, if that makes sense.
Well, look at the pattern. She's very clearly treating Mickey worse than he's treating her. That's indisputable. You can't even argue that Rose sees her relationship with Mickey as different than he does, because it's in this episode. We get verbal confirmation of her from that. She's clearly treating the Doctor as, well, maybe not even like subconsciously, but the fact that he's being so nice to her, and, you know, he immediately apologizes the first chance he gets, and then she doesn't give him the same favor in return. That's a lesser example of it, but it still kind of falls into that pattern. In The Unquiet Dead with Gwyneth, she wouldn't let her have her say. You know, I'm seeing it like over and over again, and we're going to see it in the future as well. It's not something that goes away after this episode. And again, like, if it's something that people can overlook,
but
more power to you. But
fair enough. I am actually quite curious to see how it crops up in later seasons, because again, it's been a long time since I've seen a lot of the revived series, and these things have just kind of probably just went over my head when I was younger, so I'll be curious to see how it crops up. And didn't you say that it basically gets worse in the next couple of years?
Fortunately, it reaches its peak in Boomtown. It largely goes away when Mickey does, but it gets replaced by something equally bad, in my opinion.
To see what that is.
Yeah, and you'll get to see that when we approach the back half of Series 2. Small thing, but how terrifying must it have been to be that guy in the car getting looped
Yeah.
endlessly, reacting to something that isn't there.
Oh, who
Like, would he
knows?
even have
But
any
yeah,
awareness of what's going on?
that's kind of fucked up when you think about it. Just endless loop, like endless torment.
Yeah.
Just because you wonder, could he have even swerved out of the way, or was it literally just this is happening? Is it just part of the damage of time?
Well, it must be because there's never the episode doesn't really bring up the possibility of the car still hitting Pete, but
Mhm.
hitting him differently and him surviving it somehow. Like it seems to be a foregone conclusion that he's going to get hit by the car and die in a spectacularly bloodless fashion, might I add. Like, that's a very that car crash goes fatal very quickly,
Yeah.
and there's not a speck of blood. I know it's a kids show, but it's something that I noticed and I thought it was funny. But also like how we talk about it's how poor Pete he's condemned to die. Well, poor
Yeah,
car driver, he's condemned to kill
yeah,
someone.
that's pretty heavy.
And it's a small moment, but it is nice that on the second time round, it's not a hit and run. Like the driver stays by the car. Yeah, it's just a nice thing that in that second time round, the driver also gets to be a better person.
Yeah, I guess that's true. Yeah, it's a funny point. But yeah, you do feel kind of sorry for the guy that especially when he's just trapped in this endless loop. That must have been pretty traumatic. Yeah.
Well, again, was it? Because he seemed to be reacting to Pete even when he wasn't there. Like, I'm not even certain if he would have had any...
did it reset or did he...
of what happened. Maybe from his perspective, he just sort of...
Yeah, because they never really explain...
I don't know.
Certainly not that particular element of it, so... No.
They don't really need to, but it's something that's interesting to think about anyway. Is there anything else to talk about? I do quite like the moment of the doctor talking to Baby Rose. It's something that pretty consistently gets a laugh out of me, especially the shot they chose to like have to the view of Baby Rose after the fact, how she's kind of like wide-eyed and looking off and going, "What is?"
Yeah, it is a bit funny.
About?
I like the way Jackie's written in this episode. I like the contrast between, again, the fact that she lionizes Pete after he's passed away compared to how much she clearly and pretty like good reason hates him. In the actual 1987, I just love little incongruencies like that. And again, I think I have.
Yeah, it's.
I think I have to give.
It's very real.
Again to Camille Coduri's performance. Really just sells it for me, and again just shows that character has a lot of nuance. I want to take this discussion back to Rose very briefly. You know how I said in Aliens of London World War III that Jackie and Mickey seem to have like better chemistry and better characterization than Rose, and better chemistry than Rose and the Doctor, and kind of better characterization than Rose. And I sat there thinking, why is that, Cuff? You have to wonder. This kind of continues that tradition. I mean, I know Rose's characterization is kind of more nuanced here than it probably has been certainly in the series so far, but I still get the feeling like, why aren't these side characters the companions? Now, I think I know why that might be, and it also goes to, in a way, to the issues you have with her characterization and how her behavior is framed in the narrative. But I think, the creators maybe thought to themselves, well, we've got to introduce this to an audience. We obviously need a fish out of water character, and maybe they felt like they couldn't take a lot of risks with the character. But the problem with that is because they weren't willing to take risks, even if it wasn't super intentional, because she's not as active in the plot, because she's not going through these sort of character arcs where she's sort of regretting her behavior, that impacts her characterization to the point where, someone like you, for example, finds her, an unpleasant and unlikable character. So I suspect, I obviously can't tell for certain, but if there's a reason why all of that has happened, it's probably the fact that they didn't feel quite confident enough to sort of take those risks, whereas by the time you get to Martha and certainly Donna, they're they are taking more risks with those characters, I think. So that's my theory on it.
Mm.
Mm.
I mean, it's a nice theory. It is certainly true that for a lot of the Series 1 stories, a lot of focus is given to the side characters. They've got a lot of the personal growth over the story. And there is a reason for that, which we'll touch on in the Series 1 finale. But it doesn't really detract from the elements of Rose's character that are there that I don't. Yeah, because you've mentioned Martha and Donna, but certainly companions before this have had character elements that I suppose that at the moment it's not even because I have a few issues with Rose's character, but even those are largely because I know that they're going to get worse in the future. But even these moments in isolation, it's not even the fact that there's not a lot there. It's the fact that she's not doing anything, and it's so
you
consistent.
That to, certainly, some of the companions, we've talked about, Ace in particular, but even Joe and Sarah, they're doing a lot of stuff, and they're having quite interesting sort of character arcs and interactions, even within the stories. So you wonder, what happened, basically.
Well, a bit of a spoiler for next week, the episode we're going to be looking at next time. It has two companions, and for a lot of the time they're doing what could have been done by a single companion, I think, but the way that they're characterized in that, you really feel the need for two of them. So yeah, it's not even that it's a couple of things at the moment, and again, none of them have really been my main issues with the character. It's just the fact that I know that those issues are there, so it's feeding back to these moments, and I'm realizing, okay, why? There's nothing here. Why did people latch onto her? And I've yet to hear a compelling. I've yet to hear a justification. I've yet to hear a compelling enough reason why people have gone, Rose is my favorite companion. Why? Tell me. Like I said before, I'm not going into these discussions amping myself up to put Rose down or to go, oh, Rose is everyone's favorite companion. Well, I'll show them Nina. Like I said at the start of this, I find this has been one of Rose's better episodes in terms of characterization. She does a lot of stuff that I would genuinely think a lot of people would do in her situation, and she has a lot of very human reactions to a lot of the stuff. Like there's the scene where she's showing the doctor around Pete's flat, where she's very clearly trying to ease the tension by, showing off all of Pete's stuff and talking about the potential that's there now that he's alive. And then it gets to a point where she can tell it's not going to work and just goes, okay, look, I know. That's a really strong moment, and I think that's a really good moment of characterization. It fits with what we know about her, and it's also kind of sweet and charming in a strange way. I can acknowledge those moments are there, but they're so few and far between that I just find myself constantly thinking, and especially because the Russell T Davies era, or at least the first one, feels so Rose-centric.
She's the longest.
She gets. Well, not only is she the longest. I'm sorry to interrupt you there. Not only is she the longest serving companion of the Russell T Davies era, but the entire. We'll get to this, but the entire second series is foreshadowing her departure. I mean, it does a lot of steps to do that. The entire third season, the Doctor's pining for Rose. So, she's a constant shadow over the show then. And then first episode of season 4, they foreshadow her return. And that's being peppered throughout the season as well. So even when she's not there, she's such a heavy focus. And I'm sitting there thinking, we have new companions. Yeah. Martha, poor Martha gets such a short end of the stick. She's such a good character and such a good person, and she had such potential, but her series is bogged down by not only the Doctor pining over Rose, but her feelings for the Doctor getting in the way of that as well. Martha was never really given a chance, and then Donna managed to rise above it all and be the best companion that's ever existed. But even that's just on the strength of who the character was before Series 4, and also Catherine Tate's brilliance. But so literally, for the entire Russell T Davies era, Rose is such a huge thing. So when you notice all of these little issues with her character, you're left going,
Mm.
what did you see in her, Russell T?
Yeah.
Why did you write her this way? And then what? Why? What? I want to know. That's all this is. I'm not trying to convince anyone that she's scum. I'm just searching for answers. Why do they like her? Why? Why, Fitz? Tell me. I gotta know.
Moving on from that minor existential crisis.
Should we score this episode?
I'll bring up two
Let's give
tiny
this a
little
score,
things
shall
before
we?
we do, though, that I did quite like. One,
Oh yeah, sure.
when Rose is showing the Doctor her house back in '87, you see some trophies that presumably belong to her dad. Now, I can't say this for sure. I'd have to go back and look. But I think those might be the same trophies that appeared at the beginning of episode 1. And I said, oh, well, maybe they're Rose's trophies. Maybe they're, the gymnastics thing. But if they're her dad's trophies, I actually like that. That's a nice bit of detail and characterization and a care that I sort of to help expand on these characters. And I love the fact that it cropped up there. So that's really cool. So there's that. The other thing that I really liked is when the Doctor gets the old mobile phone and you can hear Alexander Graham Bell, and there's one moment where he's like, oh, it's Alexander Graham Bell. And the reason why I love that, and this again definitely kudos to Christopher Eccleston's performance, even in a really serious moment, for a split second Christopher Eccleston is able to draw out a sense of humor and a sense of whimsy, almost like a childlike wonder at the mysteries of the universe. And I think if you'd given that moment to another actor, they wouldn't have been able to pull it off. They would have just reacted with horror. So the fact that he was able to kind of cram in that little bit of humor, I really like, and I think again, kudos to Christopher Eccleston's performance. So.
Oh yeah, and how the hell have we gone 80 minutes without talking about the fact that Doctor Who rickrolled everyone before rickrolling was a thing?
Yeah, that.
Like, I know back in 2005 that was just a song, and especially in 1987 that was just a song. I don't think rickrolling would have become a thing until like 2007 or so.
Yeah, I mean,
but I can't not hear that song without getting a little bit angry
I've
that
never listened
you
to that
got.
song, like, unironically, in any context. I physically can't listen to it anymore, so, it was a bit jarring to hear it in this episode, but, oh well. Yeah.
Okay, let's rank it.
I'm still gonna go with an 8 for me. Yeah, cool.
Me too. I'm glad we just wasted 80 minutes of your time, audience.
Oh, but they wouldn't have seen your existential crisis cuff. They wouldn't want to miss that.
I'm sure they're foaming at the mouths over that one. Oh yes, oh good. Give me that content I love. No, just come on, dude. This is
look, I'm much worse with my rants. The audience knows. It's I don't know, part of the fun, and also it's our podcast, so whatever.
Yep. And if you want to hear more of our podcast next week, we're going to be looking at the classic series episode, The Time Meddler, jumping all the way back to 1965.
Cool.
What a time. Until then, I've been Alex.
I've been Fitz.
And until then, outro.